I want to pontificate about something quite uncanny. Uh, that there is no obvious words to describe and label the things that I'm going to talk about. If you were to point a gun on my head to ask me to summarize using a word or a label, I would use the word apophasis. The things that I'm going to talk about are quite apophatic. What is apophasis? Originally, I believe it originated from a Greek word. It was used in religion, particularly at Christianity or Judaism. When a person asks, what is God? And then you use apophasis to reply them. What does it mean? Apophasis means you never answer a question in confirmation, in positive form. You always only answer a question in negative form. For example, people ask, what is God? You don't tell them what God is, because God is omnipotent, is undescribable, indescribable. So you answer, God is not the table, God is not the tree, God is not the dog, God is not you and I. Somewhat it is actually an elimination method, but you never answer question in the positive form because you are unable to. Likewise, what I'm going to talk about are just a series of questions. I don't think, first of all, they are very hard to be described in words in the first place. They are highly amorphous. I don't think they are amorphous or apophatic in a physical sense. However, due to the limitation of human brains, maybe it's neuroscience, limbic brain, we can't really augment our mind to consciously notice these things. One metaphor, I think the most apt metaphor to describe the things that I am going to discuss about is like a fish going out of water. Technically, it's all possible. However, a fish doesn't have lungs. As a result, the moment the fish goes out of water, it will asphyxiate really badly. Or you could say the analogy like a human going to space is very bad. There's no oxygen, absolutely. Or you could say it's like a human walking with hands. So you can imagine how difficult they are. And since they are so amorphous and also indescribable by words at large, I'm actually doing something quite paradoxical, oxymoronic. How can you use words to talk about something that cannot be described in words at large? But I'm going to try nevertheless. And you can imagine, since something cannot be described in words easily, it has no commercial value, but not only that, most people take it for granted. We don't even notice them. And also, what I'm going to say it's going to be very messy. It has no structure. I don't care. It's not about you. It's about me. Because I want to be able to think out things loudly. In the hope that I would be able to form a coherent structures later on after trying to talk about these things for a number of times. To start with, one thing is I notice how much I myself remember and notice misfortunes. So for example, when I'm driving, let's say initially the traffic light was green, and when I was approaching the traffic light, the traffic light turned red. Okay, that is an awful feeling. I believe most people have experienced the same. Or I also notice, when sometimes, some days when I woke up, I realize that I have a toothache, I have a migraine, or I sprained my ankle. Those are awful feelings. But not only that, when those things happen, right, you start to fantasize about what if they didn't happen. So when you have a huge toothache, you start to miss all the moments you didn't have toothache. And meanwhile, on the other hand, the reverse. So we actually notice those things very, very quickly. We relish in misery, so we want to agonize over them. In reverse, when things go really well, we don't notice. For example, let's say I was going. When I was going to a traffic light, it was red initially. When I was about to reach the junction, the traffic light magically turned green. That was so wonderful, but it rarely happened. But I'm not too sure whether it really rarely happens statistically. I feel that there is a bias there. Whenever it happens, we don't even notice it. We don't even notice, oh, the traffic light is so great going into my favor. We just take it for granted because the nature of our brain is when things go well, we don't notice. We just assume everything is okay. When things go badly, we immediately make a fuss and make a commotion. And likewise, today I don't have a migraine, I don't have a toothache, I don't sprain my ankle, I don't particularly notice them. I have to really deliberately force myself to notice, oh, my teeth are functioning so perfectly, my ankles, my legs are working so well. I don't really revel in those things. I have to force myself to do it. But of course, knowing this dichotomy has a profound phenomenal impact because we could start to really consciously remind ourselves of things that are going well and become really happy. Secondly, after this thing, another thing that is quite apophatic is I start to think why I started to notice a lot of things we definitely take it for granted, but they are not scientific. Absolutely, they are not physics. There's no law to describe them. They are not mathematical. One obvious example is why are computer keyboards in the format of QWERTY? If you read the history, it was pure accident. Of course, today we don't change it because it is an acquired taste. We have been adapted to it. And some more delusional people would argue, oh, that keyboard is the most ergonomic, you shouldn't change it. I don't really trust that. I think it's just an acquired taste. Besides that, other obvious things is like, oh, why do females follow the surname of her husband after marriage? Or why do kids follow the surname of father, not mother? Of course, this is a very sensitive topic. In the more liberal, westernized countries, there are already a lot of feminists discussing and rambling about this problem. They want their kids to have bi surname, two surnames. And then the females, some more radical one, they want their husbands to follow their surname. All these things have no explanation. Okay, besides the keyboard, besides the female surname, another obvious thing is why do we write from left to right instead of right to left? The short explanation is, oh, most people are right-handed. I'm not too comfortable with that explanation because I've heard rumors saying that lots of people were born to be left, but they were beaten out by their guardians to be right-handed. And what else? I think there are just too many conventions. Okay, for example, monogamy. Of course, today people will ramble and say, "Oh, polyamorous, polygamy is evil. Don't think about that." But read back the history. There are lots of theories speculating why did monogamy happen. Maybe because humans are really kind, humans are really unique, or some people say it is a policy used by the authority to control the society because a monogamous society would be way more ordered, easily be controlled compared to a polyamorous one. All right, so all these things I have no names for them. They are not subject to systematic studies. People generally don't talk about them. We take it for granted. Okay, those are the two things. Then thirdly, I've also thought about I also thought about, okay, because lots of people have this idea that, okay, for example, now China is going very well, it's doing very well economically. People say, oh, what if 30 years ago I went to China to study in a university there? Today I will be much better. Or what if my ancestors never left China? Or even crazier, what if I was born a Westerner or Caucasian or European? Then today I will be a first class citizen in Europe. All these hypotheses, counterfactuals, are actually very wonderful, except that if you really scrutinize them deeply, there are lots of problems. Because if let's say you went to China and studied 20 years ago, you need to imagine a China back then, 2 decades ago. It was horrendous. It was not as good as today. And then if you imagine your ancestors never left China, I'm very worried that you will not even exist. Why? Because you have to look at 1950, the Great 3-Year Famine. You have to look at 1970, the Cultural Revolution, the massacres. How many massacres were there in 1970, let alone like your chance of surviving is so low. Even your ancestor didn't leave China, staying there. You'll be die because of famine, because of massacre. Likewise for Europeans, if you were born a European, I doubt you could evade Black Death or bubonic plague. Those things were so disastrous, catastrophic. You could run the probability and say, you can cherry pick and say, I will be the one who survived. But really, there's a saying that Mother Nature is just running a dice. It's all random. So I think you should be, instead of agonizing over not being in a Great China economy or being a European, you should revel and relish the fact that you evaded Black Death, bubonic plague, you evaded the Great Famine in China, you evaded Cultural Revolution, all these things. Yeah. Okay, that's the third thing. And the fourth one is about social media. If you pay attention, if you are like me, growing up with social media, I first had a Facebook when I was 16 or 17 years old, and eventually I witnessed the existence, the birth of WhatsApp, Instagram. If you are like me and witness the entire growth process of social media, you will notice the gradual changes. Of course, in a time span of daily basis, the change was very gradual. But if you really pull the time scale and lengthen it in a decade, the change is so abrupt. One obvious one is 10 years ago, you wouldn't be able to like a comment on Facebook. You merely send a comment, that's all. You can't click reply. You can click like. There was no such thing as liking a comment. Other than that, definitely at the beginning of WhatsApp, you couldn't know whether a person has seen a message. There was no such thing as blue tick. And then in Messenger, early on at the beginning there wasn't even Messenger, but when Messenger appeared, you couldn't hold a message and react to it using an emoticon. You couldn't do that. Definitely Instagram. On Instagram, you couldn't message people. And I'm not too sure at the beginning you could already see when did a person last appear on WhatsApp, or whether you could see a person is typing, because the word typing with the 3 dots, that is really agonizing. I'm running out of time. I'll talk about this fourth thing tomorrow. Continue. Goodbye.